Welcome to the other side of Lucy Letby. In episode 8, we're going to continue looking at the evidence given by Dewi Evans against Letby. And in the last episode, we seen how much obfuscation and avoidance of the facts was going on. We finished up with him dismissing respiratory distress syndrome and hyperlactemia. And repeat again, for many people, it's the persistence of lactates in the blood that is more telling than the actual level of them. But we don't know what the level was in the blood because they ceased measuring them at 2 o'clock. But he makes an interesting comment, and he goes, the increase in respiratory rate reading was due to the insertion of long line and UVC. So he's saying the increase in respiratory rate readings was due to the insertion of a long line and a UVC, handling of the baby and heel prick procedure, which caused the baby discomfort. So that's what he said. Again, if you were doing an exam and you said, oh no, we don't need to worry about the increase in respiratory rate, it's just because we're handling the baby, you would fail the exam. Dr. Evans expected the heart rate to increase with an increased respiratory rate, which would be a concern. Well, it would be a concern. He goes on, he says, but as the heart rate has remained stable, he said he would not be concerned, and the baby was not even requiring oxygen. So how true is that? Well, the problem with preterm neonates and respiratory distress, so the heart rate and respiratory rate, especially during distress, frequently decouples. In respiratory distress syndrome, rather than a simple increase in a heart rate, you can get a drop in the heart rate during distress. Bradycardia, which is a slow heart rate, can occur in neonates during distress, or there may be no change at all during distress. The linkage between respiratory rate and distress, and cardiac rate and distress, and how they both join together, is not always the case. The baby could have a normal heart rate, an elevated respiratory rate, and that wouldn't mean that the baby was in respiratory distress, but it wasn't showing in the heart. A lot of this is due to the very poor autonomic nervous system. So the autonomic nervous system, mainly the vagus nerve in all of us, automatically alters heart rate, respiration, sweating, stuff like that. And that doesn't necessarily work very well in babies. He says that there is a link between when you need to worry and when you don't need to worry. And that link is demonstrated by heart rate going up with respiratory rate is not true. So he carries on making excuses for the Countess of Chester Hospital, which is really what he's there to do, it seems to me. He says it happens that children in neonatal units can go without fluids for 4 hours. He thinks that's all right. He's admitted to 4 hours, which is a big increase from the couple of hours that other people state. So we'll accept a minimum of 4 hours, but I think it's 7 hours. And it's not acceptable that a preterm neonate less than a day old would go without fluids for 4 hours, and more particularly would go without glucose. He said it was not ideal and unfortunate, but it did not make a clinical difference in this case. How does he know that? We already know he doesn't know what the electrolytes are. He doesn't know particularly what the potassium and the sodium are, and they could have grave effects on the cardiac rhythm. He doesn't know what the glycemic state, that's the amount of glucose in the baby, he doesn't know. We know that lactates are rising. We know that the baby is struggling to clear those lactates. They probably don't have enough oxygen, as he keeps saying. So, again, he can disagree, but I think he's wrong. Then he goes with saturation levels at about 97 to 99. It was as good as it gets. So that's the saturation level of oxygen measured by the little pulse oximeter, which is the little device connected to the baby's finger. So a paper from Wiley Online in 2020. So it would have been available to Dewi Evans before he gave evidence to the court. So, and it's from the Swedish Research Center Council. Let's have a look at the title. Accuracy of pulse oximetry in preterm and term infants is insufficient to determine arterial oxygen saturation and tension. So pretty much tell you all you need to know. But look at the abstract. Oxygen saturation, so that's the percentage of oxygen that they refer to in these trials all the time. So you want the baby to be over 90%. That's a measure of how saturated the hemoglobin is with oxygen. So that's the oxygen saturation. And oxygen saturation is frequently monitored with pulse oximetry, little optical device that you attach to the finger, and it reads the redness, or it reads the saturation of hemoglobin through the skin. And it's used to assess vital signs in critically ill patients. Ultimately, pulse oximetry closely tracks arterial oxygen tension, so that's the amount of pressure of oxygen in the arterial systems. So the blood just as it's leaving the left ventricle. And this provides guidance in oxygen titration, so that's the amount of oxygen that you're going to adjust into the ventilator. We investigated whether monitoring peripheral oxygen saturation would accurately guide oxygen titration in newborn infants. Very good question. So the method, 27,237 saturation readings were retrospectively paired with oxygen arterial saturation, so that the peripheral ones were compared to the actual measurement from the arterial line. And the results, the saturation overestimated the true oxygen tension by 2.9 plus or minus 5.8%. So that's actually huge. When pulse oximetry readings were within the defined oxygen saturation range, 7,809 or 20% of the saturation values were below, and 2,830, 7.6%, were above the target range. So you're looking at 30% of the readings were out. In 57% of patients, oxygen saturation levels less than 6 kilopascals were diagnosed, while the saturation readings were above 90. And that's clinically significant. So 6 kilopascals less pressure than you thought you had. And 19% of cases, the saturation levels above 11 kilopascals were recorded when the oximetry readings were less than 95%. Based on arterial blood gas analysis as reference, pulse oximetry readings do not fulfill the performance requirement for titrating oxygen in neonatal patients. So there you have it. These little things are not really that reliable when it really comes down to it. And there have been other studies that show this. So whereas it's true that Evans said you've got to look at everything, Evans selectively discards pieces of information which he cannot really do. You can't look at a pulse oximeter and say you're happy with the oxygen in the baby's blood. And if you're looking at lactates which are persistent, most people would give the baby some oxygen and see that you bring those lactates down and you improve the colour of the baby. But obviously not the way Evans. Let's look at another claim Evans makes, that fluids don't really matter. It's basically essentially saying you can go 4 hours without fluids, and again we reckon that 7 hours, not 4 hours. But let's have a look and see what research tells us about that. Surprisingly, I cannot find any research on leaving a baby 4 hours without fluids, particularly a baby who has sepsis, respiratory distress syndrome, elevated lactates and elevated respiratory rate, because I think one of the experts put it well in another case in the Letby series. We don't do experiments like that on babies because it's much too dangerous. So the baby would almost certainly become dehydrated, and it will almost certainly go in 4 hours or more, become hypoglycemic. That means having low blood glucose. It means the baby is pretty much incapable of producing enough energy to stay alive. And that is enough on its own to kill a baby, a preterm baby. Nobody really knows what the upper or lower limit acceptable upper and lower limits of blood glucose are in neonates. There are 8 and 2 are the kind of figures given, but nobody really knows, and that's the honest truth about that. You have to put a target somewhere, but is it the right target? We don't know. So Dewi Evans doesn't know either. So he shouldn't be saying in court that it's okay to leave babies for 4 hours without fluids, and it's okay not to give babies glucose, because it's not. So Dewi says the X-ray doesn't look too bad. The most up-to-date thing probably in most level 3 units that were well resourced would be using both X-ray and lung ultrasound. So you can use lung ultrasound because it doesn't involve ionizing radiation, it's not dangerous to the baby, and you can continue to monitor. And a lot of studies show that lung ultrasound is actually better at gauging or giving you a diagnosis of severity in respiratory distress syndrome. These chest X-ray is needed to establish the diagnosis and also to look for air leaks, which we are always interested in. Air leaks will be air leak can lead to a pulmonary embolism, particularly when you're using positive pressure ventilation. So Evans can't be certain, having a glance at a report or looking at an X-ray, that the baby didn't have severe respiratory distress syndrome. We don't know if the baby had surfactant, which is the treatment for respiratory distress syndrome, because we really don't have an awful lot of evidence on this baby for the clinical status. So again, Dr. Evans, unless he addresses all these issues, is not really addressing the fundamentals here. So Evans carries on in the usual, and he's dismissing everything. It's unfortunate about fluids, but it doesn't make a clinical difference. You simply can't know that. This was a baby who was stable prior to him collapsing, he said, referring to the words of other doctors had made in evidence. Just because you repeat it often enough doesn't make it true. Dr. Evans dismisses the defence alternatives, including infection, saying such evidence would appear on a post-mortem examination. Dr. Evans dismisses the defence's alternatives, including infection, saying any such evidence would appear on a post-mortem examination. How true is that? Does neonatal sepsis or ever show itself during the post-mortem? Let's have a look and see. So as we would suspect, the traditional methods of finding sepsis, like culture methods and even nucleic acid amplification tests like a PCR, is frequently shown themselves to be insufficient to detect causative agents in infectious disease. So not really very good. There are new advanced diagnostic techniques, meta-genomic, next generation sequencing and stuff like that, but that's not going to be the run of the mill, even a level 3 unit. And the progression of sepsis and any microbial treatments that are given before death can affect the presence and activity of pathogens at post-mortem. So autopsies often reveal multiple contributing factors to neonatal deaths: immaturity, related complications, channel malformations, and many other things in the next sepsis. So it isn't always a given that it's found post-mortem. So again, Dr. Evans can't honestly dismiss sepsis as a cause of death or a contributor to the cause of death. Evans carries on. He dismisses a suggestion of rapidly spreading infection in the baby as ridiculous. As he said, a pathologist would again find such evidence post-mortem. Well, they won't, or they're not necessarily will. Dr. Evans said his conclusion on an air embolism. Evans said his conclusion for an air embolism was based on a baby suddenly crashing, and more significantly, followed by resuscitation, which was unsuccessful. This is stuff that exists only in his mind. There are a whole bunch on crashing neonates. That's what they're called, suddenly crashing neonates. And that can happen without a reason. It can even happen right up to the moment of discharge. So the desaturating neonate is well known. There are multiple reasons why babies crash and die in neonatal units. Evans goes on again. He adds a subsequent X-ray and skin discoloration reports have confirmed his opinion. No, they have not. Though the subsequent X-ray does not confirm the presence of an air embolism, and skin discoloration has nothing to do with an air embolism. A collapse of this speed in a baby unit with full medical care is very unusual these days. Well, that may be true, may not be true, but it can certainly happen. Given all the factors he adds, that baby A is standard and the safest place on the planet for their needs, well, I would argue that the Franca Suggested Hospital is far from the safest place on the planet. Neonatal unit care is as good as it gets. Again, I would completely disagree with that statement. There's come on leaps and bounds over the year, yet more storytelling from Evans. Mr. Myers says skin discoloration can indicate illness due to underlying circulation problems, infection, and blood pressure secondary to something else. And Dr. Evans agrees. So there you go. So he's just blown away his own hypothesis. Mr. Myers asks if it would be flawed to diagnose skin diagnosis as an air embolism. Dr. Evans says discoloration is a general term, noting something there is present on the skin, as noted by the doctor or nurse. You can't say it's due to a specific condition. So there we are. Again, he confirms what I've just said. You cannot say that discoloration proves air embolism or even remotely proves air embolism. Mr. Myers refers to a 1989 study that showed that in the 50 cases involving an air embolism, only 11% involved skin discoloration. Dr. Evans said he had come to his initial conclusion for air embolus, quote, for baby A before becoming aware of skin discoloration. This is Evans wanting to have it both ways. He wants the skin discoloration to be a big part of the picture. So let's put it in there and influence people and then say, that's not what I'm saying. It is what he's saying, and it is not true. The judge rephrases Mr. Myers' question and asks that failure of dissociation in itself or in isolation is not a consequence of air embolism. Dr. Evans agrees. He's agreeing with me that he's drawing ridiculous conclusions here and giving them out as fact. He says that in combination with all of the factors already presented, including air in the great vessels, sudden collapse and skin discoloration, the conclusion is that of an air embolism. He's contradicting himself. People should really see this as absolute bullshit. You could not practice medicine like this in the real world and survive very long. You have to be as accurate as possible. You have to get multiple data points that are reproducible and that are comparable to one another over periods of time. And that might be short time or long time, but you just simply can't come up with diagnoses out of thin air and then say, I'm going to fit this into a pattern because I think the pattern is there. It's ridiculous. He goes on and he says, an air embolus is not common, but it's rare and unusual. Dr. Evans said that in 14 of the 17 cases he had completed for his preliminary report by November 2017, he was unaware of any medical staff member being a suspect. Dr. Evans said that in 14 of the 17 cases he had completed his preliminary reports by November 2017. He was unaware that any medical. So what were Chester Police doing then? Were they having a slow day? Were they branching out into other areas of the network? Why did they ask Dewi Evans to come along and give them reasons why babies died in a hospital if there wasn't a crime? Very confusing, all of this. Everyone is entitled to believe in or not believe in. He said he was the first to come up with a diagnosis of air embolism. No, he wasn't. Dr. J. Rand came up with that in 2015. The judge rephrases Mr. Myers' question and asks that failure of resuscitation of oneself in itself, that would be, and that isolation is not a consequence of an air embolism. Dr. Evans agrees. So Dr. Evans is agreeing that his theory of air embolism is bullshit. That's what he's agreeing to. He says that in combination with all the other factors already presented, including air in the great vessels, sudden collapse, and skin discoloration. The conclusion is that pulmonary embolism, and again, I say bullshit. He said an air embolus, quote, is not common, but is rare and unusual. Dr. Evans said that in 14 of the 17 cases, he had completed his preliminary report by November 2017 and was unaware that any medical staff member was a suspect. So, what were Chester police doing then? Were they just having a slow day? Were they branching out into other areas of endeavour? If the police came to me and asked me to investigate deaths in a hospital, I would want to know why they wanted me to investigate the death, why specifically me, and who else was involved in this investigation. I would want to know everything about that because I would regard that as my professional duty to do that. But obviously, the police can come along and ask you to investigate a local hospital and you don't suspect that they're worried about something. So he goes on, when he read her name in the press, he became aware of Lucy Letby's name for the first time upon her arrest in July 2018. You are perfectly entitled to believe that if you want. He said he was the first to come up with the diagnosis of air embolism, and this had been agreed by peer review. But that's not actually what peer review is. Peer review is when your paper goes out to people you don't know, and they read it and criticize it, and they really would be pulling it apart. They wouldn't just be going along and agreeing with everything you said. He said there were other experts who began to peer review again. That's not peer review, his report. But sadly, before completing the review, the expert became seriously unwell and died. Dewi Evans is trying to put into Evans here the words of a dead man. He's saying that this other expert agreed with him. He's really trying to squeeze one more person in there, a person who isn't even alive, that agreed with him. This is stunning stuff, really. Mr. Myers asks about a non-fatal collapse in BBB. We'll get on to that. An X-ray review has noted RDS type picture for BBA. Dr. Evans agrees with Mr. Myers that a child like BBB is prone to desaturations. So why would a baby like BBB, the twin of BBA, be prone to desaturations, but BBA not be prone to desaturations? Evans goes on to try and separate BBB from BBA, and it's very interesting what he says here. Dr. Evans, nothing compared to what we would call the index event, the collapse. So that's we. Was it the royal we, or was it more than one person? I don't know. She needed resuscitation. That's BBB. Mr. Myers asked about the differential diagnosis for BBB, concluding there was either an air embolism, suffocation, or someone had removed the lungs on purpose. What is he talking about? Dr. Evans said he was on the ball from the start and considering an air embolus. He said his opinion was reinforced by color changes every 10 seconds. We're getting some more detail about the color changes every 10 seconds. So is that like a little beacon? Or perhaps a little police car? This was supposed to be due to direct oxygenation of hemoglobin in the vasculature. Quote from the paper. And we're having it happen every 10 seconds, and we're having it happen by 5 mL of air injected into the vein. So this is not detail that was recorded at the time. This was detail that was added later on when people firmed up their idea or their conclusion about what they had actually seen, rather than record what they'd actually seen. I've never come across such bullshit in all my life. There's no attempt here to put together the fact the way a professional medic would do it. None whatsoever. And he'd asked then, if smothering is possible which Evans says that he has since discounted. The pathologist didn't think about smothering, because smothering is usually fairly easy to diagnose post-mortem. But Dr. Evans has discounted it, so it doesn't matter. Mr. Myers said it is a key aspect that the inability to resuscitate BBA successfully had led to a neuroembolism. I have no idea what that means. I think he means, because Evans said that because BBA couldn't be resuscitated, therefore BBA had an embolism. I think that's what he means. And then Evans goes on, no, it does not. We cannot do studies where we inject air into babies and see what happens. Precisely. He adds that the volume and speed of which air is injected, along with the skill of the resuscitation attempts, can make a difference as to whether the baby survives or dies. But that is also true of all air embolism, all gas embolism, all vascular embolisms. It still does not solve the question of where did the air come from? Did it come from CPR? Did it come from mechanical ventilation? Or did it come from an accidental entrainment into the venous catheters? It doesn't remove that question. So he just continues in the same irritating vein. This is really a dire cross-examination. There's no attempt to establish the facts. There's no logical train here at all. As I said, this is failure exams time. All we really needed was a neonatologist to come along and explain exactly what was happening to BBA. We'll finish here now before I lose the will to live, and we'll carry on with Dr. Sandy Bowen in the next episode. And we will see a continuation of this assumption pattern, this logical deficit, and this failure to include all the differentials and the possibilities in the death of these poor, unfortunate babies. So I'll see you in the next episode.